gentlemen, good morning, veterans here and the millions of veterans everywhere. My name is Herb Rosenblatt. I'm the National Executive Director of the Jewish War Veterans of the USA and the President of the Military Coalition. Military Coalition, this is our press conference. We are 33 organizations, military and veterans organizations. We represent active duty, retired, veterans, dependents, and survivors. And Military Coalition chairmen are represented by Colonel Bob Norton of the Military Officers Association, who's representing our two chairmen, Mike Hayden and Joe Barnes. Behind me, ladies and gentlemen, are representatives from the Military Coalition. They have my back, unlike the administration in Congress, which doesn't have my back. As we stand here, the government is shut down, military readiness is eroding, veterans fear they will not, disabled veterans fear they will not be getting checks, dependents and survivors have that worry. That shouldn't be. You're going to hear from our expert personnel about the military shutdown, about its effects, and we call on the administration and Congress to end the shutdown. Our veterans serve this country. We need the country to serve our veterans, our military personnel, their dependents, and their survivors. I thank you, one and all, for being with us. I thank my colleagues in the coalition for the great work they do, and I will be followed now by Morgan Brown from the Air Force Sergeants Association.
Good morning, and thank you for being here. With the government shut down, the uniformed services cannot fully maintain the upkeep and training that our military readiness relies upon. Many of the services that support the men and women in uniform remain closed. This profoundly affects the country's military readiness. In addition, not everyone that wears the uniform in service to their country is back at work. That being the men and women serving in the NOAA Commissioned Corps and the U.S. Public Health Service. Their pay remains in jeopardy. Even though the bulk of the military is still at work, funding for government equipment, materials, supplies, and other items that they need has not been appropriated. This lapse in appropriations diminishes the effectiveness of our forces at a critical time while our nation remains at war. And yes, we are still at war. Speaking of that, emergency funding that supports commanders on the ground and intelligence activities also remains unavailable, and service leaders report that they're further curtailing training for later deploying units, an activity that had already been reduced thanks to sequestration spending cuts. Service members transferring to and from overseas speak of problems with housing allowances not being started and dislocation, temporary lodging allowances not being paid. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that military tuition assistance programs have been suspended, and with a continued shutdown and the likelihood that post 9/11 GI Bill payments would also be suspended, that poses a problem for our folks that are serving in uniform. At the end of the day, the most important asset are our people, and the shutdown has raised significant morale concerns within the military as the force does its best to operate despite the additional stressors. This has commanders and service members alike very worried. Again, I stress with each passing day of the shutdown, the readiness of our fighting force becomes more at risk. And those serving our nation deserve better than this. Our message to the nation's leaders today is simple. It's time to end the shutdown. Now here is Major General Andrew Davis, a board member of the Military Coalition and executive director of the Reserve Officers Association, to speak to you on how the shutdown is affecting the reserve components. Thank you.
Good morning. As Morgan said, I'm Major General Drew Davis, retired Marine Corps. and Executive Director of the Reserve Officers Association of the United States. Despite the Reserve and Guard making up nearly half of the U.S. Defense Force, that's 1.1 million servicemen and women, Reserve component training has been canceled, and unwisely canceled. Congress has overlooked the need to pay these citizen soldiers, Marines, sailors, airmen, and Coast Guardsmen for their inactive drill training, that's weekend drill training. And the Pentagon has made a policy decision that excludes them from active service even when the Pay Our Military Act authorizes active duty orders. I won't suggest the Pentagon's motivation for this, but the policy they publish is out of date with the law and out of date with the realities of our nation's defense needs. Frustration grows among the reserve component population as they are unable to fulfill their mission. In the last 12 years, the Reserve and Guard has been mobilized more than 883,000 times, and 330,000 of them more than once. These men and women also responded to help their fellow citizens during natural and ecological disasters such as hurricanes, flooding, and oil spills. Today, nearly 50,000 Reserve and Guardsmen are activated, taking the same risks as active duty service members. Yet, after returning from war or disaster, they see that they are again being overlooked, making them feel that they are second-class warriors. This federal government shutdown proves to them that they are actually right, as it is unlikely that they will be able to make up lost training time and income, unlike the furloughed civilian employees who likely will get retro pay. Our military readiness is being impaired because reserve readiness is a perishable commodity. And 1.1 million people in the reserve force are offended at how they're being treated. Not to be overlooked is the rest of the uniformed services, the Public Health Service, and the NOAA Corps, that was totally left out of the Pay Our Military Act. These groups sent individuals into war zones as well, or were totally forgotten. It's time to end the government shutdown now. I would now like to introduce Kathleen Mokler of the National Military Families Association.
Good morning. I'm Kathleen Mokler, Government Relations Director for the National Military Family Association and a proud military family member. Military families have shown their courage and resilience through the past decade of war and in past conflicts. It is harder for them to show the same strength and resilience when faced with the uncertainties caused by the government shutdown. While we are grateful for the quick action on the Pay Our Military Act, the overall security of our nation cannot be addressed in a piecemeal fashion. Last week, we had the families of the fallen relying on donations from gracious charities to bury their dead until appropriate legislation was passed. Today, military families and survivors still face uncertainty and financial difficulties. Survivors don't know if they will receive their GIC payments at the end of the month. Families who have used the GI Bill to pay for the education of their children don't know if they will be able to pay tuition for the rest of the semester. The absence of a defense appropriations bill, along with budget cuts and sequestration, poses a threat to the long-term readiness of service members and families, as training has been curtailed, moves have been postponed or canceled, and important cannot be executed. Military families, like other American families, rely on other programs and services provided by the federal government. The shutdown of the WIC program will affect many young military families who rely on this assistance. Public schools, educating large numbers of military children, face the loss of much-needed impact aid funds if the shutdown continues. Service members continue to deploy and fight on behalf of our nation. They and their families need to know that the programs and services they rely on will be available to ensure that readiness. We need a permanent fix, not the temporary band-aid of budget deals, or to face this again in a few months. The National Military Family Association, along with the Military Coalition, ask you to pass the appropriation bills, end the government shutdown, and show military families and survivors that they continue to have the nation's support. I am pleased to introduce our next speaker, Steve Gonzalez from the American Legion.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Steve Gonzalez. I am here on behalf of the National Commander, Dan Dillinger, who is currently at our national headquarters in Indianapolis, and will also be hosting a news conference later today, and on behalf of the 2.4 million members of the American Legion. It is very difficult for us to understand why veterans are first on the list of spending sacrifices when Congress fails to compromise and achieve a solution to one of its most fundamental tasks, managing our budget. We have been assured and reassured by the President and members of Congress on numerous occasions that the budget won't be balanced on the backs of veterans, and yet here we are today. It seems impossible to believe now that millions of men and women who are transitioning or already have transitioned from military service will be forced to depend upon charity for their very existence before the country they had fought to defend gets around to caring for them due to a government shutdown and political bickering. Most of our veterans will be seeking employment and training in the open employment market. Others will be eager to return to college or take up vocational training instead of a job. However, with this current situation, there will be no effort by any agency to assist those transitioning service members or veterans with employment or training on any level if the shutdown continues and further. These men and women already have been exposed to hardships and suffering during their military service, making it difficult to transition to civilian life. Asking them to attempt to move into civilian employment with an employment rate exceeding 20% in some areas is even more difficult, but asking them to do so during the government shutdown of the Department of Labor's employment and training programs, such as Jobs for Veterans state grants, the Transition Assistance Program, Homeless Veterans Reintegration Program, and the Federal Administration USERRA enforcement is simply outrageous and a disgrace to all those who have served. In a true sense, we are not giving anything to veterans. We are making a token payment on the debt we owe them, and it takes the form of opportunity. Just trying to give them the opportunity to get back to the place where they can enjoy the same freedom of opportunity which they have preserved for us through their service and sacrifice. On behalf of the American Legion and National Commander Dillinger, I express our thanks and appreciation to our fellow colleagues and advocates standing here with us today. We hope that the President and members of Congress can work together in a bipartisan manner to end this government shutdown. With that, I care to introduce you Gary Augustine from DAV.
Thank you. My name is Gary Augustine. I'm here on behalf of the 1.2 million members of the Disabled American Veterans, known as the DAV. We thank you for being here to hear our concerns about the government shutdown and its impact on America's wounded heroes. As you know, unless the stalemate is resolved by the end of October, more than 4 million veterans may not receive their disability compensation, pension, or GI Bill payments in November. And for many, those payments may be the primary or only source of income. The shutdown is already directly affecting vets, as prior to the shutdown, the VA was adjudicating more than 100,000 claims per month and had reduced the backlog by 1/3. Obviously, as VA employees continue to be furloughed, the ability to adjudicate claims diminishes and the backlog starts to increase. As monthly compensation and pension payments are missed, many wounded and ill veterans won't be able to pay their mortgage, their rent, utility bills, car payments, or even provide food for their families. More than 350,000 survivors who may have lost their family breadwinner will not receive survivor's benefits, which may be the only income they have. Veterans who have started fall semester will not have benefits paid, which they need for tuition, books, rent, or even food. 3,500 funded VA research projects will be put on hold in every VA academic health center, affecting the future health of millions of veterans and disrupting the work of thousands of VA clinicians who are focused on using research to try to restore vets wounded in Iraq and Afghanistan. Our message to the President and Congress: defaulting on paying veterans benefits is not an option. We're here to tell them this is the time for the country to fulfill our promises to the men and women who served. Last week, DAV National Commander Joseph Johnson sent a letter to the President, the U.S. Senate, and the U.S. House of Representatives, expressing outrage over the partisan politics that are preventing the federal government from honoring our sacred obligations to our nation's heroes. Commander Johnson demanded that the President and Congress reach an agreement to fully fund all federal programs, services, and benefits that directly or indirectly support America's heroes, especially those injured due to service. Our elected officials must understand that posturing and playing politics with veterans is unacceptable. DAV is also calling for Congress to pass legislation to extend advanced appropriations to all VA funding, not just health care, so that veterans continue to receive all the benefits and services they have earned, even during budget stalemates and government shutdowns. Advanced appropriations for VA health care has meant that veterans' medical services have not been suspended during the shutdown. We want the same protection against budget stalemates extended to the entire VA budget. The Department of Veterans Affairs has already shut its doors to veterans seeking to file claims for their earned benefits. The DAV remains on the job and has set up alternative sites to continue providing benefit counseling and claims assistance to veterans and their families. We will not stand idly by while our nation's injured and ill veterans suffer because of partisan politics. Veterans are a national priority. It's time that our government treat them as one. The federal government must find a way to work together and end this shutdown, as veterans found a way to protect our country when they wore the uniform of the U.S. military. Thank you very much, and I'd like to introduce my good friend Ray Kelly from the VFW. Ray?
As Gary said, I'm Ray Kelly with the Veterans of Foreign Wars. Along with my colleagues, we're here to represent all veterans, all service members, all survivors, all family members who don't have a voice on their own. That is why we have an organization to support them. We have to end this shutdown. Congress has to do its work. Piecemeal will not work. Putting it together little by little is not going to solve the problem for veterans. From the time they join the service to the time we lay them to rest, there are benefits that are suffering. ROTC students who are wanting to join the military will suffer. Those payments will not go out. Our death benefits, if this continues, will reduce the amount of interments that the National Cemeteries Administration will be able to do. My friends have already spoke to many of the issues and the impact. We need to end the backlog. We need to solve sequestration. Sequestration will affect DoD readiness or continue. There is no guarantee that VA will be exempt on the next round of sequestration cuts. The Secretary has spoken to this. We need to step forward. We need to demand that Congress work, do their job of passing a budget and solving the problem, the self-inflicted wound of sequestration. It is time to take those barriers behind you down, not for a little while, not as a political stunt, but forever. The only way we can do that is with a budget. And with that, I'd like to introduce Paul Rykoff with IAVA.
Good morning. My name is Paul Rykoff. I'm the CEO and founder of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. IAVA is proud to be here today to stand alongside our brothers and sisters from the military coalition. This is an unprecedented showing of strength. Over 33 national veterans and military family support organizations are here today to send a message to America, to the President, and to Congress, and the shutdown. My grandfather served in the South Pacific years, and he never lived to see this memorial. But I think he'd be proud of what we're doing here today. This unity that exists among veterans of all generations and all backgrounds. And quite frankly, it's unity that we don't see on the Hill in Washington. We all stuck together when we were in combat. We put the mission first. We put our country first. Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, That's what you need to do now. Put the country first and end this shutdown. Thousands of our members across the country are in school right now, utilizing the GI Bill. They're doing the right thing. They served overseas, they came home, and now want to start a new life. And they don't know if they're going to get paid on November 1st to continue school. They don't know if their disability checks are coming in just a few days. That's ridiculous. That's shameful. That's outrageous. And it needs to stop. We've seen demand for our education support program increase by 500%. When the government shuts down, our veterans still need support, and they come to these groups for it. The overflow has to go somewhere, and it's coming to us. We want to send that message loud and clear that now is the time. In the Army, our values mean everything to us. Loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, personal courage. That's what these people stand for. That's what this country stands for. That's what we need our politicians to stand for now. Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, end the shutdown. Now I'm going to turn it over to Herb, and I just want to thank Herb again on behalf of the entire military coalition, sir, for your leadership and for your steadfast support for all our nation's veterans and military families. I'm going to turn it back over to Herb.
Ladies and gentlemen, the speakers you've heard today and the group behind me represent some 10 million people, not just people, 10 million who have served in our nation's armed forces. Keep that in mind, please. 10 million who have served and who now need your support and the support of the administration and Congress. I want to welcome, the crowd has grown since we've been here. I want to welcome the veterans who have joined us and thank each of you for your service to our country and for being here today. Ladies and gentlemen, we will not take questions from the podium, but we will. Our people are available to take questions after we close. But before I close, I want to thank IAVA, the Iraq-Afghanistan Veterans, Paul Rykoff, the Chief Executive Officer, Tom Tarantino, and Kate O'Gorman, who put this together, who did the heavy lifting. Let's thank IAVA. Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, members of Congress, let's take care of our military people and veterans. Thank you all.